All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries that you probably don't know anything about because they come from obscure sources. And if you did know about them, they would change your life. And so I'm trying to document these things and, keep them from falling on the ash heap of history. And today's our 196th, I believe that's right, 196 on what is called the Reciprocal Church. Shout out to Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system of theory. And he articulates his version of religion or deity that he calls Sector 3. And that is one of several things that we've gotten into in the Reciprocal Church in attempting to syncretically construct a new religion, a new way of going about spiritual practice. I like to think of the Reciprocal Church as it's a reciprocal, one over church, but also everybody is a member. But when you are initiated, then you are no longer a member. You can initiate yourself out of it. But everybody's a member to start with. And we have been looking at things that are going to help us decode the New Testament. My research has shown that this syncretic approach to putting together a new religion is going to be needed because the Western religions are about to collapse under their own weight of all the lies and all the fraud and the psychological operations. In particular, we've been looking at the New Testament and the basic hypothesis that the New Testament was a Roman psyop written by the Romans or under the auspices of the Romans. It was obviously written by some Jews or somebody who knew a ton about the Old Testament. But there were plenty of, traitorous or Hellenistic Jews to go around that, within the Roman Empire at that time in the first century. Judea was a Roman colony going back to 63 BC. And before that, for another 2 centuries, it was under the Greeks. Alexander the Great's generals' children, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And so Palestine was did enjoy about a century of sovereignty or independence from this about 160 BC until 63 BC under what's called the Maccabees. And there are a couple of books, apocryphal books of the Bible that have been weeded out of the canon that are called Maccabees, and that's kind of what it's about. And they were very zealous and law abiding, the Torah abiding, and but the Jews were very hard to deal with for the Romans because they believed in this monotheism and they didn't believe in graven, they had a prohibition against graven images, which included statues of Caesar. And they were pretty xenophobic. They didn't really believe in mixing with other people. And they followed the law very strictly, and they had some pretty strict laws. Their kosher law, their uncleanness laws, of how you prepared different foods, and how you did your you know various rituals and sexuality, and in particular just the belief in not bowing down to Caesar. And so after the war against the Jews in 66 AD that lasted all the way till 73 AD under the generals Vespasian and Titus, who eventually became emperors in Rome, both of them were wounded in battle, and both of them were pretty sick of dealing with the Jews, and probably hated the Jews quite a bit, at least the zealous kind. And so they came up with this Jesus character in order to pacify the Jews, to get them to look up to a Prince of Peace, and one who was wanting to turn the other cheek and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, to walk an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack, and to see that a Roman soldier had the greatest amount of faith, more than all other Jews. The New Testament is pretty clearly pretty pro-Roman and pretty anti-Jew, and so that requires some kind of explanation, because that's not really the people that were living at that time in that place were not that way. And so that is a great departure for the New Testament, but we wonder why. Is it because he's the Son of God, or is it because the Romans made it that way? And if you look at the evidence, you end up looking at Josephus, and Josephus was a Jew, if he ever existed. And he was a military commander in the war. Also, it was a priest. But he eventually figured to himself that the God now favors the Romans, not the Jews. He surrendered to the Romans, to Vespasian, gave Vespasian the star prophecy, which basically said, I foresee that you'll be the emperor someday. When Vespasian did become the emperor, he brought Josephus with him to the court at Rome, and he adopted him as his own son. And he got him to be the court historian for the Romans, and he wrote Wars of the Jews along with Jewish Antiquities, and both of those books were written at Rome. And Jewish Antiquities is really the only work from the first century, other than possibly a passing reference in Tacitus, that has any corroborating evidence to the existence of Jesus. But when you realize who Josephus was, then you can't really take him seriously either, because he's straight Roman propaganda. And, he wrote the Wars of the Jews to glorify Titus and Vespasian, the two generals and now the emperors. And if you read Wars of the Jews at the same time that you read the Gospels, then you began to start sensing that something's wrong. There are too many parallels between them, and the parallels are all, when you dig into them, they are grim, mocking humor, parody after parody, satire, and a lot of demeaning, calling the Jews all kinds of names, swine especially, fishes, and this author, now that has been known uh, throughout the past. Um, Many of the court in Elizabethan England understood this, and as we will see at a certain point coming up, all of the works of William Shakespeare are on this topic, um, and which is a very good proof of this being true. But in the modern day, Joseph Atwill was really the first person to really flesh out this thesis. It was suspected by many that the Romans had something to do with the Gospels, but to have put them all together was really Atwill's. To see that there was like a whole program there, and that there was a mockery, and that there was kind of a pattern of parallels. Atwill's parallels mainly show how the book of Luke, or really the Gospels, how they parody the wars of the Jews. So Jesus had a 3-year ministry in Judea, and Titus had a 3-year military campaign in Judea. And wherever Titus goes in the history, take it back 40 years, and that's the same place that Jesus goes in the Gospels. And the things that Titus actually does are prophesied by Jesus in parables or symbolic language. He metaphorically predicts things that come true literally by Titus. So we are waiting for Revelation, but Revelation has already come. Titus was the second coming of Jesus. And many people throughout the ancient period understood that. And that's why Josephus' Wars of the Jews used to be part of the Bible. They really didn't get rid of it until they realized that it was like a double bind, because it does mean that Jesus' prophecies are correct, but it also means that Titus Caesar is the second coming of Jesus. And so Christians today, if you are worshiping Jesus, you are really worshiping Titus. And the joke is on you until you kind of figure this out. We are looking at a little bit of the work of Michael Menescotts, who took Joseph Atwill's thesis and expanded on it greatly. And he came out with a book just recently. I ordered it, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. And I think it'll be a little bit more user-friendly than his website. Great information, and it's well organized, but it's still, there's just so much that it's kind of just hard. It's unwieldy a little bit, and it's hard to present it. But what he basically says, now if you look at my thumbnail, you can see that he has this little it's a graph, a chart of all of the correspondences graphed out between the book of Luke on the vertical axis and Wars of the Jews on the horizontal axis. And it turns out that the Flavian dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, and Titus's brother Domitian, from 69 to 96 BC, they literally signed their names to the book of Luke and Wars of the Jews. When you read them together, they sign their names. It says APTVS. Menescot's theory is that the AP stands for Appian Pneuma, which basically means the Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit. And then the TVS obviously stands for Titus Vespasianus. And the TVS imprint, you can see on Roman coins from that time period, from 80 AD. And so, you know, it's not like, you know, it's not like a stretch to think that, oh, TVS, that's just kind of random. No, TVS is the actual imprint that they used for their own coins. So when they signed their names to these gospels, they were signing literally their names, TVS, Titus Vespasian. Now, Domitian came later, after Titus died in 81 AD, and Menescat's theory is he's not really sure whether he thinks that Domitian or Titus wrote like the first 2 books of the Wars of the Jews, because there's 7 books of the Wars of the Jews, and the first 2 really don't get into the actual Wars of the Jews. They're background material from earlier periods. And so you could, the Wars of the Jews could have come out just as 5 books, and then the 6th and 7th one, which are really numbers 1 and 2, they could have come out later and just been like, oh, well, we'll just introduce the topic. But then they put more parallels in there. Atwill believes that the Gospels were written by Titus and Vespasian, but many of the other books of the New Testament were written by Domitian, especially the book of Revelation, the book of Acts, possibly part of the book of John, and the epistles. Atwill ties together the epistles, the 7 seals of the epistles, along with the 7 seals from the book of Revelation, and ties it up with the writings of Suetonius, who was a historian from the 1st century, early 2nd century, I think. And if you read Suetonius's book, The 12 Emperors, he talks about all 12 of the major Roman emperors. I guess it is Julius Caesar, and then Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, or Caius Caesar, and then Claudius, and then Nero. And then there's the year of the 4 Caesars. Nero dies, and then in quick succession there are Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, and then finally Vespasian in 69 AD, and then Titus, and then Domitian. So that's what Suetonius writes about. And if you read the section on Domitian, you begin to understand the imagery in the book of Revelation. The visions that are being had by John in the book of Revelation are the same images that are being described by Suetonius in his 12 Emperors section on Domitian. We'll break that down a little bit more. We're going to try to read a little bit here from Menescat's, and there's a lot to this, but I'm looking forward to getting his book. But we're going to read a little bit from his web, his articles on the web. This is his compilation article, and we're going to just go to kind of his research. So my research revealed that the parallels in Luke and Wars of the Jews involve both documents parodying each other, with the parallels arranged to form a complex and clearly intentional pattern. When plotted, they form 5 Latin letters, APTVS, Appian Numa Titus Vespasianus is his best guess, although the TVS is pretty obvious. The AP is questionable. But this is also the Trinity. Titus, Vespasian, and Domitian are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Since it isn't, and just by the way, Domitian was very jealous of Titus and pretty much couldn't stand him. And so after Titus died, Domitian tried to kind of denigrate the remembrance of Titus. Okay. Since it isn't possible to parody a story until the story to be parodied actually exists, if the core narratives of two stories very intimately parody each other, this can only mean they were created together. To me, that's pretty commonsensical and pretty obvious. Let me read that last sentence again. If the core narratives of two stories very intimately parody each other, this can only mean they were created together. And I agree with both of Atwill and Menescot's that, Titus and Vespasian got a team of Jewish experts, traders together to come up with this. They maybe even had a contest to, write a narrative. They might have based it on the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were not discovered until the 20th century, but presumably Josephus had access to them, because Josephus refers to the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by a Jewish sect in the 1st century, probably, or the 1st century BC, and there are many writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls that don't exist elsewhere. And they have full copies of all the books of the Old Testament, except for the book of Esther. But there are a lot of sectarian documents there that describe the rules and regulations and procedures and beliefs and all the different things that you would need if you were a Jewish sect of trying to put together a community there, which was a place called Qumran, which is like 20 miles from Jerusalem. And amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is an introduction to chapter 2 of Samuel, 1 Samuel, I guess, and that is not found in the normal canonical Bible or the books, other books of Samuel that have been discovered. And so this long intro to chapter 2 of the book of Samuel, Josephus refers to it. So Josephus knew about at least that aspect of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They weren't found anywhere else except for Qumran, that introduction to Samuel. So Josephus might have taken what was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which features, a teacher of righteousness, and then a wicked priest and a liar. And so I think the story in the Gospels is kind of loosely based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I think they put together like a group of Jewish scholars, and just said, write up a story and that has these elements in it, 50 different elements that it has to have in it. Virgin birth, and believe in me and you will be saved, and demons, touching you and you get rid of your demons, and all of that. And they had all these different people submit different copies of it, and they took the top 4, and they took Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then the rest of them they put into a cave, or into Egypt, and then they were discovered many years later, in the 20th century, in the Nag Hammadi cache. That's just speculation completely, but I mean that's kind of how I'm envisioning it at this point. Moving forward, as will be shown, these parodies are carefully hidden using subtle metaphors spread out in the texts. to ensure nobody would realize, yet allowing the author to reveal it whenever they chose in order to prove that Luke has the same origin as Wars of the Jews. This origin is undeniably, and indeed explicitly, the government of Vespasian and Titus. This thesis explains many things about Christianity and about Wars of the Jews, for example. It explains why there are references to Jesus in all copies of Wars of the Jews that have the semblance of being added in to a narrative that would flow perfectly well without them there. It's because they were added by a team of editors at the outset who were trying to ensure the parallels would be correctly positioned to reveal the APTVS signature. It also explains why Luke is such a jumble of stories mashed together. It's because a team of editors had worked and reworked it, probably for months, to ensure all the metaphors were in the desired places. It also explains why there were multiple synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with sometimes differing yet sometimes identical contents, because with their contents ordered completely differently, with their contents ordered completely differently. It was done this way so that Matthew could be published first, with little risk of people discovering the parallels with Titus, and no risk of them discovering the APTVS signature, yet enabling Luke to be published afterwards without risk of it being rejected as fake, enabling the APTVS pattern to be revealed at the time of the emperor's choosing. That's kind of interesting. I don't know, I would like to know whether he discovered this APTVS pattern in the book of Luke, but I'm wondering if he tried to find it in like the book of Matthew or in the book of Acts. Or any of the other books. Are there patterns in these other books? It's pretty hard to put together these patterns because many of them can be hidden, and so you might not find all of them, certainly not the first way through. I mean, he said it took him many years to find all these patterns, and a lot of them are insider information. Like, so if you don't know one piece of information, it's kind of like the 7 seals thing. You have to know the first seal to open up the first seal so that you can get to the second seal. Anyway, the first half of Wars of the Jews may have been added during Titus's reign. In the second half of Wars of the Jews, where the pattern forms the V and the S, it is evident that both documents parody each other. But in the first half, mostly Luke parodies Wars of the Jews, suggesting it might have been added later by Titus after Vespasian's death in 79 AD. Reasons why it seems that the first half of Wars of the Jews was added later are that section has parallels seeming to parody Luke, but a severe lack of detail that seems to be parodied by Luke, which is kind of the opposite of what a lot of the most visible parallels or parodies are from the second half of Wars of the Jews. It's mainly that Luke is parodying Josephus, Wars of the Jews, because Josephus is a historian, or is supposed to be a historian. He's writing about actual events that occurred, the Wars of the Jews. Many other scholars and other people, vouch for the fact that this war did occur. And so he's talking as a historian, and he says that Titus does these certain things. And then the parody is in the parables of Jesus, where Jesus says the parable, says it metaphorically, and then it's fulfilled literally by Titus. So the Gospels are parodying Wars of the Jews. For example, the fishing example that I use a lot, where Titus is, fighting the Jews on the Sea of Galilee, and many of the Jews fall in the water, and Titus has to, his men, basically like harpoon the Jews out of the water. And that is parodied in the book of Luke at the same location, at the Sea of Galilee, where he meets Simon and Andrew right before his ministry. And this was right before this was right before Titus's military campaign. Also, it was before he really got started. And incidentally, the general that Titus was fighting in these battles in the water there at the Sea of Galilee was named Jesus, General Jesus. And then in the Gospels, Jesus meets Simon and Andrew and says, come with me. They're on a fishing boat. Come with me, and I will make you fishers of men. So he's predicting that God, him, the Son of God, will take his followers and make his followers fishers of men. And that is exactly what Titus does in Wars of the Jews. His followers are harpooning Jews out of the Sea of Galilee, literally. So that's a parody. That's showing that Luke is parodying Josephus. And but Menescott is saying that in the first half of Wars of the Jews, it's usually the other way around, where Wars of the Jews is parodying the book of Luke, which shows that the book of Luke, which shows that the first half of Wars of the Jews was probably written after the book of Luke, and it was probably put in there either by Titus, but I would think that Domitian put it in there, and so does Atwill. So that'll be an interesting point of contention between the two, that hopefully when I get this book, I can't even remember the name of it, but it should be pretty explosive and exciting to get it, and we'll be dipping into it on this channel, and dipping further into this work as we go on. I hope you don't mind me rambling, but it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great